I'm Jamie Ralph. I'm from Galway in the west of Ireland. It's the third biggest city in Ireland, and I'm a fan of the Argentine club Newell's Old Boys from Rosario.
Hi Jamie, how are you doing?
I'm great, Sean. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be on to speak to you a little bit more about supporting Newell's from the west of Ireland, and I'm looking forward to having a chat.
So tell me about Galway, man. What's life in Galway?
Galway is, life in Galway it's pretty cool. It's very different to London. So I mentioned that I lived in London for 6 years and kind of moved back to Galway to live a bit of a slower lifestyle. It's a city of about 80,000 people, and I live about 30 kilometers from the city, so I'm actually more in the region. And it's very much a small city. Like, when you have 80,000 people, it really feels like a town. It's on the coast, so we've got the Atlantic Ocean, and it's very popular with tourists. We get a lot of tourists here. It's known for its music scene, traditional music, culture. There's a lot of speakers of our native language, Irish, as well in the Galway region. Pretty cool city, pretty small. The one thing to mention is it rains a lot. So we get an incredible amount of rainfall. So that is the one downside of living here.
You said you were living in London. How long were you in London?
I was in London for 6 years. I moved over there after I graduated from university in Ireland and started my career there. And I had a really great time, incredible experience. And then about 2 years ago, I decided, along with my fiance, to move back to Ireland to be closer to family and friends. So left London behind, but I think still left a big part of my heart in London. Yeah.
So Jamie, my first and most important question for this podcast: how and why Newell's?
Yeah, it's a funny story, because everybody that I speak to thinks that I have family in Argentina, or I'm a big fan of Lionel Messi, which I am, but that's not the reason for supporting Newell's. So the reason that I started to become a fan of Newell's was when I was living in London around about 5 years ago. My first club is Tottenham, and I was a season ticket holder at Spurs, so I used to go to see them at White Hart Lane every week, and after that they moved to Wembley. And at the time, of course, our manager was Mauricio Pochettino, the Argentine, who started his career at Newell's Old Boys. And I remember that when Pochettino joined, he was doing an interview for the media ahead of the North London derby, which is Spurs and Arsenal. And I was watching the interview, and they asked him, was he ready as a manager for the big derby between Spurs and Arsenal, one of the most hotly contested derbies in the world, and you have some really heavy tackles flying in and a fiery atmosphere. And he said, hold on a second, I've played and I've scored in the Clásico Rosarino for Newell's Old Boys. He said that's a derby. He said that's one of the most fierce rivalries in the world. So he said something along the lines of, I think I can handle Spurs and Arsenal. And that just sent my mind crazy. I just thought, wow, what is this derby he's talking about? The Clásico Rosarino, Newell's Old Boys, Rosario Central. So I started to do loads of research on it, and I started to learn about Newell's Old Boys. I thought I was already a huge fan of Pochettino at that stage, as our manager. And I thought, wow, this is his club, and this is the club that means so much to him. And I started basically researching them, watching their games, and it just grew into a bit of an obsession. And I fell out of love with the Premier League at a similar time. So I was still going to the games, but I started to watch the Argentine league as well. And ever since then, I've been following Newell's Old Boys every week.
What in particular was it that made you fall out of love, as you said, fall out of love with the Premier League?
I think around about the same time I discovered Newell's and I started following them, there was a lot of money coming into the league, and I really cherished the romantic side of football and the fan culture, and what winning a match or a title means to fans, but also what it means to the players. And I'm really kind of attracted to the story in football of young players joining their hometown clubs and becoming stars for the club in the city where they're from, or the town they're from. And I felt more and more that side of the English game was being eroded by money. And, you know, you had teams like Manchester City being taken over by consortiums or states in the Middle East. You know, you had American ownership coming into Man United and Liverpool, and they're just throwing money at buying the best players. And I just felt the league had become so obsessed with building the perfect team, you know, no matter what. You know, throw the money at building the perfect team. And I felt that romance had gone. And I felt that what I really loved about the Premier League was fading away quickly. Now, I have to say, you know, being a Spurs fan, it wasn't the case as much, because at the time, and certainly that time when Pochettino took over, he brought through a lot of homegrown players, and we had the likes of Harry Kane and Ryan Mason come through from the youth team, and we were buying English players like Eric Dyer and Dele Alli. So I think my love for Spurs wasn't affected, but my love for the league and the fact that, you know, Manchester City and Liverpool and Man United were trying to just steamroll the league by spending obscene amounts of money. My interest in the league itself and watching games that weren't to do with Spurs, it was just fading, you know. So I think the Argentine league almost gave me exactly what I was trying to still look for in the Premier League, where you have teams, especially with Newell's, where they're mostly made up of players who are from that city or from that town, and they're really playing for the badge on the shirt, you know. They're really they're players who were in before they started their careers as footballers. They were in the stands with the fans that are watching them now, if that makes sense.
When I do research on these clubs, when I do on Argentine clubs, there's a sense of real passion amongst the fans, and it's about the community, the neighborhood, and you know, it's so grounded, and it's not financial. It's not I don't know how to put it, but there's a sort of texture to it that you don't find anywhere else. There's shades to it that you possibly wouldn't find anywhere else. And the more I learn about it, the more I read about it, I feel like I am watching the wrong league. And I have been watching the wrong league. But and it's exactly like how you said, because it's so deep. It's so deep rooted in not just sport, in life, you know, and everyday life, and how much it means to them. I'm enjoying the time I'm spending learning about it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And personally, I mean, the attraction to the likes of Newell's Old Boys and clubs in Argentina and other smaller leagues is that the fact that the players are still human to the fans. And I think fans naturally look to see if the players that they watch every week are as human as them, and they look for characteristics and qualities that they can see in themselves or people they know. And I think at the moment, when you look at super leagues like the Premier League, that's almost becoming impossible, because, you know, the Premier League, I don't like to criticize it, but it's millionaires, you know, running around. It's millionaires playing for these clubs, and they've lost touch, I think, with everyday life and with the normal person on the street. And I think the beauty of Argentine football is that the players still retain a sense of normality. You know, I think if you talk to local fans from clubs in Argentina or other countries, they'll say, oh, it's still normal to see that player on the street. I've met him 10 times and I saw him in the local shop, or, you know, he came for a drink with the fans even, you know. And I think that's just like impossible in the Premier League. I don't think that exists anymore, where the players are accessible to fans. And I feel there's a beauty in that, in the likes of the league in Argentina, where, you know, the players are still the local street footballer. You know, they're still the kid on the street that you saw kicking a ball against a wall a few years ago. And now they're playing in front of 40,000 fans, but they haven't lost that sense of community. I mean, that's what I like to believe. It's obviously not true for every single player. And probably the players that move to Europe that dies a little bit for them, and maybe they come back to Argentina with a higher sense of themselves. But I think with Newell's, it's different because we have, and I mean, in fairness, it's true for a lot of Argentine clubs, but we have a situation where a lot of players do leave for Europe, and that's natural in Argentina. If they reach 23 years of age and they have the talent, they'll be snapped up. But they do come back, and a lot of them take huge pay cuts to come back and play for their first club. And that shows you that those players are not coming back for money. They're coming back for the feeling, and they're coming back for the connection that they have with that community or that fans. And that to me is so special in football. And that's, I think, why I've become so attracted to the Argentine League and to Newell's Old Boys, is that these players are so connected to that club that, you know, they can be offered 10 million a year by a club in China with no history or no fans. And they still have, you know, that fire inside them that says, no, I'm not going to go for the money. I'm going to go back and play for Newell's Old Boys because that's my club and that's where my family are from and that's where my friends are from. You know, I think there's a real beauty in that.
It's a big deal, right? The returning hero. They almost turn into a sort of a campaign to get the guy back.
Yeah, that's right. It's huge. It's huge in Newell's. They call it a sense of belonging, so that, you know, where the player leaves and goes and plays in Europe, but he feels throughout his career he always belongs in Newell's. You know, that he can go and play for a club in Europe, but he'll never really feel part of that club.
Yeah.
But he'll always be a Newell's player. And there is the campaign even today. I saw on Twitter that there's a player who started his career at Newell's called Ezequiel Garay, who plays for Valencia. He's leaving Valencia now in Spain.
Oh, okay.
And he made the announcement today that he was leaving the club. And I just saw so many replies saying, come back to Newell's, return to your home, come back to Newell's. So there is that campaign. And I think because it's happened so much over the years, and there's been so many cases of legendary players coming back to play for Newell's, and even throughout his career, Lionel Messi has famously said that he'd like to play a season in Newell's, that it becomes natural now that it's almost a part of their career that if you go to play in Europe, you have to come back to Newell's and play a season here eventually again, you know, because like you said, they're treated as returning heroes, and that must be, I mean, for a footballer, that must be incredible just to walk out again to the pitch that you made your debut on, and for 40,000 fans to be screaming your name. You know, I think it just must be magical.
You've been to a couple of games now. You went.
Yeah, I traveled in, let me see, October 2019. So not too long ago, about 8 or 9 months ago. Okay. After I started following Newell's and watching every game online and becoming friends with people online and starting my Twitter account, Newell's Old Boys English, I obviously made the decision that, you know, I have to go. And I told my girlfriend at the time, you know, I told her, I said, I'm going to have to go to Argentina sometime soon. And, you know, I obviously invited her to come with me, but she said, no, you can go on your own. You know, she's not too interested in football. So I started to plan it and saved up some money. And I was lucky in that I had become friends with so many people in Rosario that, you know, planning the trip was so easy because it was like, okay, when you arrive at the airport, I'll pick you up. My friend said he would pick me up, take me to the match. You know, how are we going to get tickets? No problem. I already made you a member of the club, you know, so it was amazing. But yeah, it was an unforgettable trip. I managed to go and see Newell's twice at El Coloso, which is officially known as the Estadio Marcelo Bielsa. And I saw 2 games. The first game was a loss, and still an amazing experience because it was Newell's were playing Gimnasia, who are a team from Buenos Aires, who are managed at the moment by Diego Maradona. And Maradona is a former player of Newell's, so he was returning to the stadium where he was once welcomed as a hero. To be there for that, my first game, was just amazing. But the Newell's lost 4-0, you know, it was like the high had to come down eventually, and it turned in from an incredible high to a bit of a low when we were leaving. But then about 10 days after that, I was still in Argentina, and I came back we played a team called Defensa y Justicia from Buenos Aires as well, and that was a 2-0 win for Newell. So that was very nice to see a win and to see some goals as well. But the whole trip was incredible. You know, I did some podcasts in Buenos Aires, and I was interviewed for TV outside the stadium because when you're at the stadium and you're speaking English, straight away everybody looks at you and they're like, "Who's this guy? Who's this guy?" And it was amazing. Yeah, really. You know, I just want to go back. I think I feel you get something inside you. It's almost like an addiction. Once you've experienced it once, you just want to go back again and again. But yeah, I mean, the hospitality and friendliness shown by the people in Rosario and Buenos Aires to me when I went over was just incredible. You know, it's just nicest people in the world.
I was watching this one video where there's not a light on the ground and there's just these fireworks, and then people are holding up their phones.
No, I think what the video you're talking about is probably a banderazzo, and a
Okay.
banderazzo is there's a tradition that in the week before the Clásico game, which is the Clásico Rosarino, when Newell's play Rosario Central, the two teams in Rosario play, that it's almost like a party in the stadium where all the fans are invited and the players come onto the pitch, and they sometimes have a training session that evening. So it's like the last training session before the game, and the fans just go wild and they let off fireworks, and it's basically a gesture to the players to say, you know, this is our celebration. Go and win the game. Go and win the derby. You know, but it has become well known around the world now. Every time the Banderazzo takes place every year, there's videos that go viral. Look at these fans from Newell's Old Boys. You know, you have a lot of football content, Twitter accounts sharing and retweeting. And it is, I mean, that's one of the first videos I saw when I was researching Newell's Old Boys and trying to find out more about the club. And I just thought, wow, this is out of this world. You know, this is, I mean, it's a dream for me to actually be part of that. And when I went over the Clásico that season had already been played.
Okay.
But I'd really like to get over there for the Clásico, and to go to a banderazzo because it's so special, and it's a festival of light and phones in the air and chants, and for the players, I mean, it must be quite nerve-wracking after that to go, then have to go with the pressure and try and win that game. But I mean, that match in particular, Newell's Old Boys and Rosario Central, it's something else. I mean, it's so fiery, it's so spicy. It's a rivalry that it cuts very deep. You know, there's only two clubs in the city, and in Rosario, you're either red and black of Newell's Old Boys or you're yellow and blue of Rosario Central, and there's a real hatred there. You know, there's a real hatred there, and they've tried to tamp things down, but it's a match like no other.
I was thinking of this today, and I thought to myself that, you know, I'm speaking to Jamie, who's a Spurs fan, and ideally you and me should be talking about the North London derby, but but here we are, and we're talking about this derby at the other end of the world, at the other end of the world for me, at the other end of the world for you. So just tell me more, man, about this derby. It sounds amazing.
It's insane. I mean, all of the famous matches from each club basically are around that derby. I think to win that match, it's bragging rights for years, you know. And I mean, it's been so often it's actually a very poor game of football when it comes around. I mean, I think for the last 3 or 4 years, every game has been a draw because there's so much pressure on each team that they're almost afraid to attack. It's two teams defending, and there isn't many chances. And I mean, there's sinister elements to it. I mean, I remember, you know, when I looked up about the derby, I read about it, and you know, there is a sinister side to Argentine football, and I know that William, the San Lorenzo fan that you spoke to, he mentioned the Barra Brava, who are the hooligans in Argentina. And, you know, when the Clásico Rosarino comes around between Newell's and Central, the Barra Brava will, you know, they'll write graffiti on the wall that says, if you don't win this match, you're dead. You know, there is a violent element to the derby, and that's unfortunate. But in a strange way, it adds to the story of that match, and it adds to the stakes. And I don't want to be someone that thinks says that I support that or that's really special.
Right,
But because it means so much to the people of Rosario, that match has become, like folklore now. So before the match, you'll get graffiti on the walls saying if you don't win the match, you're going to die. And now you have a weird situation where that graffiti has turned into Newell's fans spraying that to Rosario Central, so that they think it's their fans that sprayed it, but it's actually Newell's fans, and it's Rosario Central do the opposite. So there's a lot of dirty tricks at play. And I mean, like there has been some famous matches over the years. I mean, Newell's won the title in 1974 against Rosario Central to win the title. Central have had many famous wins over Newell's. And, there was a match 4 years ago where Maxi Rodriguez, who's the club captain of Newell's Old Boys at the moment, most people will know him for his time at Liverpool, Atletico Madrid. He scored the winner at the stadium of Rosario Central in 94 minutes. And there was just silence in the stadium because there's no away fans allowed to go to games in Argentina anymore. And that's due to crowd trouble and things like that. But that game where you see Maxi Rodriguez scoring and all you can hear is Newell's players and the bench. It's almost like a game today where there's no fans in the stadium because of coronavirus, because the whole Central Stadium, thousands of people just go completely silent, There's another famous clip from 2004 where they showed a Central fan. Newell's had a corner. They showed a Central fan blessing himself, and then Newell scored, and it showed the fan again, and he just looked desolate, distraught. So this game has taken on a sense of folklore, and I think there's that sense that if a team loses every other match in the season, as long as they win that game, all is forgiven. It's taken on that folklore.
And I mean, it goes back, even their nicknames are linked to this, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So Newell's are known as La Lepra, which is leprosy, and Los Leprosos are Newell's fans. We're lepers.
Okay.
And Rosario Central then are known as Canachas, which is scoundrels.
Okay.
And those nicknames go back to the early 1900s. In Rosario, there was a charity match that was organized for victims of leprosy. So for almost a leper colony and people who were suffering with that disease. And the clubs at the time, Newell's Old Boys and Rosario Central, were asked to play this match for charity. And Newell's Old Boys said, no problem, we'll be there, we'll play the match. And Rosario Central refused. Okay. They didn't want to play the match for charity. So then Newell's became known as the Lepers, the club who wanted to play this charity match for leprosy. And Rosario Central, who turned down the invitation to play the match, became known as the Scoundrels, Canachas. And that has run true to today. That's the nicknames of the clubs. And proudly, we call ourselves Lepers and they call themselves Scoundrels. So that's the story. And it's such a unique nickname. I think that when I was originally looking up, the information and the history of Newell's Old Boys, that drew me to them as well. I thought, wow, the Lepers. I said, what a nickname. You hear things like the Red Devils and the Reds and the Whites, and it's so boring, and you just hear, wow, this is the Lepers. And it's taken on its kind of own, it's become a talking point since I started the Newell's Old Boys English Twitter account, because I use phrases like a player has leprosy if they're a big Newell's Old Boys fan, or something like that. Everybody's like, leprosy? What? You still have leprosy in Argentina? It's so funny. People get confused, and then when they find out the nickname, they're like, oh, okay, I see. But it's a unique element of following the club that the fans say, we're sick with leprosy. That's a saying that Newell's Old Boys. I've had friends in Argentina say to me, you're sick, you're sick. And I'm like, what? And they're like, you're an Irish Newell's Old Boys fan. You have to be sick with leprosy, So it's, and there's also a big banner, which I love, at the stadium that says, if I am to die, let it be leprosy that kills me. I love that. I love it. I love it so much. It's just like,
That's
It's
lovely,
a
man.
great phrase to have in a football stadium. It's so
Yeah,
unique.
what a unique turn of phrase, man. I mean, what a way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And I think that's what makes Newell's Old Boys stand out. It's a very unique club. I think there's that's only one element of the other stories we could talk about that make
Yeah.
it unique, and the fact that as well. I mean, Newell's Old Boys is an English name for a club
Yeah.
in Argentina, and I think that everybody who hears that thinks, where did that come from? Newell's Old Boys, and of course the club was founded by an Englishman, Claudio Newell, whose father was Isaac Newell, who had emigrated to Argentina from Kent in Argentina, or Kent in England, sorry.
Right.
And then Claudio was setting up a football club in Rosario and decided to name it in honor of his father, Isaac. So they were called Newell's Old Boys. And I mean, I think it's incredible that, 100 years later, this club, it has the name Newell's Old Boys, but it has taken on a character and a meaning that is so much more to so many people. And it's amazing that the name remains, and that link to the UK and to Kent remains. And I think that's another unique side of the club.
How did the Twitter account start?
Twitter account started not long after I started following Newell's, and it kind of came out of the fact that I found it hard to follow them without there being an English Twitter account to learn more about the club and to find out what was happening each week and who the players were and who the manager was. And at the time, I started to watch some streams on a Sunday night to see how Newell's were doing. And then I didn't speak Spanish. I still don't speak Spanish well, but it's certainly a lot better than when I started to follow Newell's. I can understand and say some basic sentences now. Okay. But if you don't speak Spanish, it's very hard to follow a club that doesn't have that English presence. And funnily enough, Newell's Old Boys is actually the only club in Argentina that has an official English Twitter account. Okay. But it was inactive for a long time. So when I started following Newell's, they weren't tweeting. They might have tweeted like once per month, and it was something that was maybe Google Translate from the Spanish, so it didn't make a lot of sense. So although they had an official English account, it wasn't giving me any information that helped me to follow Newell's. So I thought, wow, this could be done a lot better. And is there any other fan accounts? So I had a look and there wasn't. So I just decided, well, if I start this up, it's going to help me to learn more about Newell's. Yeah. It's going to make me want to commit to following the club and watching the games. And it's also going to tell this, what I think is quite a unique story and a background. It's going to tell that story to other English-speaking fans. And I think the club deserves to have a bigger following in the likes of England, where there are those links with Kent and managers like Marcelo Bielsa now, who manages in England. So I just decided to do it myself, and it started out, with me taking some of the Spanish tweets and rewriting them in English and posting news about the club and posting the results. And of course, some of the matches are on so late that it was really hard to stay up for matches that were on 1 a.m., 2 a.m. UK time. And so I was posting the result the next morning, and there was a few followers coming through. There was, 300, 400 followers. Okay. And then Marcelo Bielsa, who is former Newell's manager, the stadium is named after him. He's a club icon. Mm. Then he took over as the manager of Leeds United. And overnight, there just was this huge interest from fans in England around Newell's Old Boys. And they wanted to know who Marcelo Bielsa was, what his background was, and who his first club was, and where he won titles. Mm. And I saw that opportunity, and I created a thread about Newell's Old Boys and how they were Marcelo Bielsa's club, and a little bit more about Bielsa. Mm. And that just went viral. And then, I think in the weeks after Bielsa took over, I got 3,000 new followers. Wow. And it's grown since then. There's probably, I'd say there might be 20 to 30% of people who follow the account who are genuinely interested in Newell's and Argentine football. But I'd say 70 to 80% of my followers are Leeds fans now, who have really formed a connection with Newell's because of Bielsa, similar to how I did with Pochettino. I mean, I'm the same as them. I started to follow Newell's because Pochettino was an ex-Newell's player and a fan. And I really wanted to know more about the club that he came from. And it's the same for those thousands of Leeds fans that follow me now. They want to connect with and learn more and follow the club that means so much to their manager, Marcelo Bielsa.
It's fantastic that you're doing this because there's so much. I tried to, like I was telling you, I tried to understand more about the club, and there isn't that much information on the club out there. I mean, there's a lot of information now about Bielsa, but just in terms of the history of the club and things like that, there are bits and parts, but nothing sort of in depth. So I think it's really fantastic that you're doing this.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of information about Bielsa. There's a lot of information about this is the club where Lionel Messi started. And there isn't a lot of information about the history. I mean, Newell's was founded in 1903. They didn't win a title in Argentina until 1974. And since 1974, they've had they've won a title in every decade, I think. So a lot of the history is kind of after 1974, because that's when the team started winning titles and those players became famous and moved to Europe. And before that, I mean, the history is hard to dig up if you don't speak Spanish. But I agree. I mean, I wrote a blog piece called The 5 Most Iconic Newell's Old Boys Matches, because I wanted to try and get people involved in the history of the club rather than just kind of Marcelo Bielsa related stuff. And, a lot of the club's history involves Marcelo Bielsa because he's such an iconic figure. But there were really real glory moments for the club apart from that as well, after he left and before he arrived. But I also think an important thing to say is that Lionel Messi has said that he wants to come back and play for at least 6 months in Newell's. Now, whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. But there is little knowledge of Newell's Old Boys as a club out there at the moment among the football media and about journalists. They know the name, they know Messi came from Newell's, but they don't know much else. And I think it's important that there is an English presence there for when that happens in the future, or if that happens. So if we're talking 3 years' time and Messi leaves Barcelona and he's going to come back and play in Newell's, there's obviously going to be the eyes of the football world on Rosario and on Newell's to see what happens. And I think it's important that there is someone or something there to be able to fill in the blanks for those members of the media or fans, and I'm passionate about that, if that happens, there really needs to be someone who can write and speak in English about what this means to Newell's Old Boys and to tell them the history of the club. There's people who are much more qualified than me to do that. There's many English journalists based in Buenos Aires who are real experts on Argentine football and the context and know so much more than me, than the history. But I'd like to be able to spread the disease of Newell's, as the leprosy disease around the world, because I think the club deserves that following. It's provided so many players to European football, managers. I mean, when you see the list of players who came from Newell's Old Boys, it's really it's an iconic club, I think, in the history of football recently. I think it is. I do believe that, and I'd like more people to know that, and to know that that there is other clubs beyond River and Boca in Argentina, that Newell's Old Boys has a history that's worth talking about and worth celebrating just as much as Boca Juniors or River Plate.
Lovely, and I hope that happens, man.
Me too. I've always said to people that, and I've said it to my girlfriend as well, that if that happens, I'm going to be in the stadium for Messi's first game at Newell's. I'll be there. I don't care what it takes. If I have to leave my job, if I have to leave my family, if I have to spend 10,000 euros on a flight, I'll be there. So that's the dream. That's the dream.
That takes me to my next question. What is your earliest memory of the club?
I've only been following them for about 5 years. And I mean, my first memory of following them, I remember in the first few weeks when this happened, when I heard Pochettino talking about Newell's and I started to research them, I started to look them up. I remember playing as them in the game Pro Evolution Soccer, PES, on the Xbox. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start a career with Newell's Old Boys. Yeah. I remember doing that. Yeah. I remember trying to find their streams on a Sunday night. I remember watching. It was around. They played River Plate in Buenos Aires at the famous Monumental Stadium, huge stadium in Buenos Aires, and they won. They won, and I remember watching it on a really, really bad quality stream, SD quality, like on a Sunday night. I think it was from a betting website or something like that, you know. Okay. And I remember watching that, and then I also remember. Then I started listening to a podcast, a brilliant English language podcast on Argentine football called Hand of Pod. It's the only podcast that speaks about Argentine football in general. There's some other podcasts now that are club specific.
Yeah.
But Hand of Pod is run by an English guy called Sam Kelly, who lives in Buenos Aires, and he has some other guests who are English guys. I think he's had some other English speakers on the show over the years as well. But every week they speak about what happened in the Argentine league. So I looked at that podcast, started listening, and I mean, that podcast gives you the education that you need to know to follow Argentine football, and they invite questions every week, and it's easy to start interacting with the other listeners and the presenters on Twitter. So that was something I did at the start. So around those few weeks when I really decided, okay, I'm now a Newell's Old Boys fan. I'm coming down with leprosy. I remember listening to that podcast, watching the games on a Sunday night on a really bad stream, and starting a game of Pro Evolution Soccer with Newell's Old Boys.
Who is your club legend?
My club legend, there's a few you could name, and I think there's three distinct icons of the club really when people ask me who are the legends. And the first one is usually always Marcelo Bielsa. The stadium is named after him.
Right.
And he played for the club. He wasn't a great player, but he's had a trailblazing coaching career. And then there's the current captain, Maxi Rodriguez, who's had 3 spells, I think, at the club, if not 4, who keeps coming back to help the club, has been there through thick and thin. But I think the legend that I would pick is Tata Martino, Gerardo Martino, known as Tata, who is the most capped player for the club. I think he's played over 500 times for Newell's. He then returned as a coach and won the title with Newell's. He won the title as a player. He won the title as a manager. I think he is 100% the icon of the club. I think he represents Newell's Old Boys, everything that's true about the club. He sacrificed a lot. I know when he was playing as a player in the early 90s under Marcelo Bielsa, he went to Spain and joined a club in Spain at the peak of his career, and he actually came back to win another title with Newell's midway through the season, and he was like, no, I'm going back. He played like only a few games in Spain, won the title again. I think his dedication to the club is unrivaled. Came back in 2013, one season, he won the title from nothing. He put an incredible team together, and then of course after that he became the manager of Barcelona, because I think a lot of it was probably the recommendation of Lionel Messi, who had seen him win the title with Newell's. But for me, Tata Martino, he's now the manager of the Mexican national team. Okay. He has won a title previously with Atlanta United in the MLS, and managed Argentina for a short time, managed Paraguay and other countries in South America. So for me, I mean, he's 100% Newell's. I think what he did as a player, what he did as a coach, as a Newell's fan, we could never ask him for any more. He gave everything.
Players who deserve a bit more praise.
It's an interesting one, because Newell's have given so many good players to bigger clubs in Europe over the years. Yeah. But in recent times, we've actually let a few really good players go through the cracks. And the one for me recently is a player called Lisandro Martinez, who now plays for Ajax Amsterdam. And he came through the academy at Newell's. I think they signed him from another club in Argentina at a very young age. But we had him in the reserve team about 5 years ago. And, he was in and around the first team. He was very close to becoming a first team player. But for some reason or another, he wasn't fancied, and he didn't. The club decided that he wasn't a Newell's player. He wasn't fit for us as a team in the Argentine league. And there's a lot of finger pointing now. It was that manager that said it. It was the chairman that said it. It was his decision, and nobody wants to own up and say it was me who made the call that Lisandro Martinez should be sold, should be let go. But he left Newell's without establishing himself in the first team, and he was sold for a small amount of money to Defensa y Justicia. I mentioned them previously, a small club really in Buenos Aires. They've only been in the top division for a number of years. They're a very small club. He was sold to them, and they saw his talent immediately, and he played. They came second in the league a few seasons ago, and he was a real important part of that side. He's a central defender, and he had such a great season for Defensa y Justicia that Ajax came in for him. Ajax bought him for $7 million from Defensa y Justicia, which is a lot of money for Argentina. $7 million is still a big transfer fee. And Newell's received, if you're to believe what the club said, they received about $1 million from that transfer deal, from a sell-on clause.
Okay.
He transferred to Ajax, and he's had an amazing start at Ajax. He's been one of the best players last season for Ajax, played in the Champions League. He's been capped for Argentina now, so he's played for the national team. And I think he's going to go far. Yeah. And I think he'll be bought by possibly a bigger club to Ajax. Yeah. And that's a real regret, because he could have, he was never going to stay in Newell's for his career. We would have always sold him on. Yeah. But if we could have kept him, brought him to the first team, he would have helped maybe with our defence at the back. We've had a very poor number of seasons where we've been close to relegation. And then we could have sold him on for his real value and got the money that Defensa y Justicia received, $7 million, which would have been a real boost to the club's finances. So when I see the name of Lisandro Martinez now and I see him doing so well, I definitely have a lot of regret, and I think many Newell's fans do, that the club didn't value him enough, because he's going to go on to big things in world football.
Young players you're looking to see more of?
Young players I'm looking to see more of. There's quite a few at the moment. It's Newell's is a club that it does have great foundations in place for the youth academy and bringing players through. So there always seems to be the next big thing, At the moment, there's 2 players in the first team who've been playing league football, who are subject to interest from Europe. Hieronymo Cachabue is a defensive midfielder who is in his second season. He's had some injury problems. A really, really good deep midfield player who can score goals and pass as well. I think the big clubs in Buenos Aires really want to sign him, River Plate and Boca Juniors, but he's been scouted by Real Betis as well in Spain. And he's my favorite player in the first team at the moment, but he's had a bad injury, so it's kind of, we're waiting to see will he come back. And then there's another central midfield player called Aníbal Moreno, and Moreno has been scouted by Newcastle United and some other clubs in Europe. He is more of an attacking midfielder, great passer, scores goals. He scored for us this season, and he's been playing in the Argentina under-20 squad. Real talent, and they're kind of in the 19-20 age group. So if they have another season with Newell's, it'd be great, but they're probably going to go off soon. Definitely some talented players coming through the ranks, and I think it's a mixture of how long can we hold on to them, can they stay injury free, and will we have a manager or a coach that gives them the chance, and that will decide their future, I think. Because clubs don't have big budgets, and because Argentina is such a conveyor belt for Europe, there's a kind of a feeling that there are going to be good players in these academies, because the academies, they've produced players for years, so they know that they believe in that they have the structures in place to produce good players. So there is a real focus on developing young players, because clubs simply, they just don't have the money to buy good players from other clubs. So you have a mixture of free transfers, Bosmans, the end of contract players moving, and young players coming through. So, I think what you have then is you do have a lot of young players who are given their debut early, and then they don't do anything. Their careers go on the wayward, and they join a club in Ecuador or Colombia, and you never hear from them again. So that happens a lot. Of course, there's players who don't realize their potential, but for sure, I think if I think back over the years of when I've been live tweeting Newell's games, it's very common for me to say this player's coming on as a substitute for his debut. there's a lot of young players used by managers. And I think, as I mentioned earlier on, that's the beauty of following Argentine football, that if you start to follow the clubs, it's very likely in a few years that you can tell your friends, I saw that player when he made his debut in Argentina. Now he's a star, you know. It's, you know, especially for, I know some Independiente fans, which is the first club of Sergio Aguero, and they can remember when Aguero came on as a 16-year-old, you know. So it's nice to be able to see future stars in action. And you know, there's a lot of fans of Argentine football who have, you know, gotten jobs now as scouts, you know, for clubs in England and in Europe, because they're watching the games every week, and the clubs want to find people who really know their stuff. And if you see a talent, you know, early on, you can make money if you go to a club in Europe and say, this player is going to be good, take a look at him, you know. So I think Argentina is a hotbed of young talented footballers coming through, making their debuts for the first time. And a lot of them do go on to Europe and to much bigger things. I think the day that I arrived in Argentina and went to that game against Gimnasia, the whole day is just etched in my memory, because I started out my journey in Ireland, and I flew to Amsterdam, and then I took a flight from Amsterdam to Buenos Aires, about 14 hours long. And when I arrived in Buenos Aires, I hadn't slept much, and, you know, jet lagged, very tired. My friend Nicolas from Rosario, he picked me up outside the airport. He had a Newell shirt. He had a hat of Marcelo Bielsa. He had some mate. So mate is the popular drink in Argentina. It's like similar to a herbal tea that everybody drinks in Argentina. He had one of those in the car for me, and, you know, it's there's a lot of caffeine in it, so it boosts your energy. And then we drove from the airport in Buenos Aires directly to Rosario. It was about a 4-hour drive. And we just had, you know, we had so much fun on the drive, talking about Newells. And you know, we stopped on the highway on the way to Rosario. We found a sign that said Rosario, you know, 200 kilometers. We held the Newell shirt above it, and we took some pictures, and then we arrived in Rosario, and I hadn't slept for like 2 days, but I was buzzing. I was so buzzing. And we got to the stadium, and the stadium is in a park in Rosario. It's in this amazing, almost like a tropical park with palm trees surrounding the stadium in the middle of the city. And there's Newell's fans everywhere. There's people singing, there's people drumming. The atmosphere is incredible. And I'm just thinking to myself, you know, 24 hours ago, I was in Ireland, and now I'm in Rosario, and I'm about to go to a Newell's Old Boys match. It was amazing. And the sun was shining. It was like 30 degrees. And then we got into the stadium, and the stand in Rosario, the stadium in Rosario, the stands are very steep, very high at the El Coloso del Parque, the stadium of Newell's Old Boys. And you walk up the steps behind the stand, and it's really steep. And then suddenly you get to the top, and you walk out through a doorway, and then you see the whole stadium. And I just remember that. I remember just walking through walking up the steps, walking through the doorway, and I saw in front of my eyes what I had only seen in videos and pictures beforehand, and it was amazing. And I stood in the stand, and everybody started to sing, and started to let off fireworks. And of course, then when the match started, Maradona came out, and Maradona is, you know, one of my footballing heroes and an icon of world football. And to see him in the flesh, and he saluted the Newell's fans, and he started to, you know, he talked in the microphone, and, you know, he said stuff like, I'm still a Newell supporter, and someday I'll come back here for good. And to live that experience is just, I recommend it to anybody that is thinking about going to Argentina to watch football. Do it. It's, I mean, I was a season ticket holder for years in London, and that was one of my dreams as a kid, to go to Spurs every week, to live that life of being a Spurs supporter. And I did it, and it was amazing. But Argentina, the culture, so much more vibrant. It's you know, it's just part of life in Argentina in a way that it's not really in England. And the Premier League is so sanitized at the moment. You know, you can't do this and you can't do that. You can't bring flags in, and you can't drink beer in the stands, and you can't sing this song, you know. Whereas Argentina, it's more real, and they allow the fans to express themselves. And while the football on the pitch is, you know, not as good as the Premier League, the fan culture and the sense of community, especially with the Newell's Old Boys Club, is it's magic. It's magic for me. And I think a lot of Argentine fans, they look at someone like me from Ireland and they think, why are you supporting Newell's Old Boys? Why did you come to Argentina? You know, Argentina, this country's a mess. But I think they don't understand that the culture that they have there around football is very special. And it's very special. And I hope they realize that, because, and I mean, the culture in Argentina, the fan culture has been sanitized as well over the years. You know, away fans can't go to games now, and some games have to be played behind closed doors because of crowd trouble. So, you know, I'd like to think that the Argentinian football can be preserved in this very special way, but it's never a given that it will always be like this. So I urge anyone that can have the opportunity to travel to Argentina to watch football, do it. And even don't just go to one club. I went and watched other games when I was in Argentina. I went to a game in Buenos Aires between two other clubs, and while it wasn't as good as Newell's, and of course I would say that, but it genuinely wasn't, it was still a great experience and different to going to Newell's. So anyone that's lived in Argentina for a while, or I mean, even you interviewed William about his love of San Lorenzo. He spoke about living in Buenos Aires, and I think if you're a football fan that loves to watch football and become part of a football family and a culture and a club, it's I couldn't recommend it enough.
To the point that you were making earlier about, you know, the commercialization of it, this is something that I think about a lot, because fans like me are also part of that story, right? Because of that commercialization at that time, Premier League, the TV rights, all of that coming in, is the reason someone like me could experience it so far away. So I'm very, it's a tightrope, you know. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't acknowledge that, because you know, that's part of how I got into the experience and how I kind of identify with it in many ways.
I mean, that's completely fair. And I with all of the stories I've told about going to Argentina, I mean, it was a big trip, and you know, the flight is so long. I mean, like 14 hours on the plane. Personally, I don't think that's natural for any human. You know, it's a long trip, and the world is a big place. But I think you make such a valid point there about the internationalization of the Premier League and other European leagues, and you're right. I mean, like there are positives to the globalization and the fact that new fans can start to support clubs that before were completely inaccessible to them because the internet didn't exist and they couldn't watch matches on television. And that's amazing. I mean, I need to remind myself of that more when I think that the Premier League has gone too far. I mean, it reminds me that there's a famous Irish commentator, former player in the Premier League, called Jim Beglin.
Yeah.
He's a co-commentator on many of the international streams for the Premier League, and I'll follow him on Twitter. He's a former Liverpool player, and everything he tweets is responded to by users in, I think it's Ghana. It's certainly some countries in Africa, and they worship Jim Beglin like a hero because he's the co-commentator on the stream that they get. Yeah. And he tweets about something and everything is like, Mr. Beglin, when are you back on the coverage? Are you going to be commentating on Liverpool and Chelsea? How are you today, Mr. Beglin? And I just think that is amazing. I just love it. I love it so much that Jim Beglin, because he's a co-commentator on the international feed of the Premier League, is now a superstar and a hero in Africa. So, you know, the globalization of the Premier League has these kind of subplots that are really, really positive, really positive.
Game that has left you disappointed and a game that has left you elated.
Oh, I think the ones that spring to mind straight away are the ones that I was at in Rosario. I mean, the first game that I went to is a 4-0 defeat, you know, and I remember tweeting about it, and I genuinely had some Newell's fans tweeting me saying never come back because you brought the bad luck of the Irish to their stadium.
Ouch.
You know, because I traveled, you know, thousands of miles for my first game, and they lost 4-0. And it was so bizarre because Gimnasia, the team that won, they were bottom of the table. They hadn't won a game in months. Newell's were doing quite well. We were like up in the continental qualification positions. So it was completely out of character, you know, an outlier of a result. And I although I had a brilliant time at the match, I left the stadium on a bit of a downer because I thought, well, I'm a bit jet lagged. I haven't slept in 48 hours, and I had a great time at Newell's, but they just lost 4-0. And I have people on Twitter telling me that I brought the bad luck of the Irish to the game. So I was a bit down after that. But then, I mean, the elation, I think, came about 10 days later when I went for my second game. And that was a 2-0 win. And I was in much better form because I'd been in Argentina for 2 weeks. I had no more jet lag. I had a really good sleep that night. I'd been to a barbecue with some friends beforehand. We were with some English fans, actually, who we met and brought to the game. They were traveling around South America, and they were fans of Leeds. So I was having a really good time with them. And and that evening after the game, went and drank a few pints with friends, and we just, I mean, I think they were polar opposites, you know. First game in Argentina, 4-0 defeat. Second game, 2-0 win. It was the complete opposite experience, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It was brilliant to be able to have that story to tell in hindsight, you know. I have a sticker that a friend of mine sent me. So friend of mine, Nicholas, the guy who picked me up from the airport to bring me to Newell's, you know, become a really close friend of mine, a massive Newell's fan who speaks perfect English and took an interest in what I was doing on Twitter, and we became great friends. And he sent me a sticker of Marcelo Bielsa. There's a famous picture of Marcelo Bielsa when he won the title in Newell's. He was lifted onto the shoulders of the players and the fans, and he was shouting in the air a famous slogan, Newell's Caraco, Newell's Caraco, which basically translates as fucking Newell's, you know. So it's a bit of a swear word in Spanish, but it's a term of real, you know, excitement, and it's an endearment to football fans. And there's that famous picture. He printed it onto a sticker and he sent it to me, and I have this sticker, and I can't decide where to put it. So I've left the sticker, you know, just lying around. I'll keep it safe, but I thought about putting it on a laptop or putting it on a car, and I just thought, no, it'd be wasted there. So I'm thinking of the perfect place to put this sticker of Bielsa, but I also feel that it doesn't have the right place yet, and maybe I should just keep it in my wallet and keep it as a reminder that I'm a Newell's fan. And also that reminds me of something else that's in my wallet, and that's my membership card for Newell's Old Boys. So I became a member of the club, and they sent me a membership card, and I have a special number, and you can use that card to enter the stadium. And I keep that in my wallet, and that's cool because whenever I meet people and talk about Argentine football and talk about Newell's, like especially people from Argentina, they think I'm not serious, like, about the club, you know. They think I'm a part-time fan, you know. And then when I say, hey, I'm a socio, which is their name for a member of the club, a socio. When I say I'm a socio, here I can prove it, look at my card. Then they realize that I'm serious, you know. So I keep that close as well, the membership card, and I think that means a lot as well.
You've been a fan now for just a couple of years, not a long journey, but it's been some journey. So what has it really meant to you?
I mean, it's kind of changed my life in a weird way, because I think as a football fan, you pick one club at the start, and I was a Spurs fan since I was 6 years old, and I still am. And then you never think that there'd be another club, you know. And I do believe in that. I would never have another club in England, or or even really in Europe. Someone said to me one time, they said, you can support a second club as long as there's no realistic chance that those clubs will ever meet in a match. And when I started supporting Newell's, I thought, are Tottenham ever going to play Newell's? And I thought, nah, probably not. So I said, it's okay. And I truly believe that. And I think anyone that, wants to argue with me on that, they can be my guest. But I obviously grew up as a football fan, following Spurs, and never thought that I would support a second team. And when I started supporting Newell's, I just kind of thought, okay, I kind of like the idea of running a Twitter account for a football team. But I never thought it would be anything beyond that. And to think that kind of 3 years after that, I was in Rosario with new friends, speaking a little bit of Spanish in a stadium in Argentina. I mean, it's mad. It's almost like I started to live another life, like I became, I don't want to say a different person, but there's still a lot of my friends from childhood and from my town and from my local area who don't know this about me, who don't know that I have this Twitter account and I have been to Argentina to follow this club, and that I know I have friends from Argentina. So it's so unexpected, but all I can say is that I'm so blessed and lucky that this came along. Yeah. And I mean, I all I can do is thank Mauricio Pochettino, really. And I'd love someday to say to him, thanks, thanks for saying that about Newell, because now I'm a fan of the club and now I'm a leper like you. But I mean, it's been life-changing, and I feel part of the family of Newell's, and I feel like this is going to be something now that you can never really let go. Yeah. I think that once you become a fan of this club, once you go there, once you make friends, that you'll keep going back, and it becomes a part of your life and your personality. And it's definitely made my life better, that I've found this community of fans, of people that have allowed me to have that experience in Argentina, and hopefully many more. And that I've met so many people online, and it used to be kind of uncool to make friends online. Yeah. A few years ago, if you said, I have a friend that I met online, this is before everybody started meeting their partners on apps like Tinder and internet dating. But it used to be quite uncool. But now I think when you can, there's genuine friends I have that I have met through Twitter, and I don't feel embarrassed saying that anymore. Yeah. And I think years ago, it used to be, I met that person on social media. You kind of think, that guy's a bit of a geek or a nerd or something. But the fact that I can say, I met this person on Twitter, and then I went to Argentina and stayed in their house, and I went to a Newell's Old Boys game with them. I think that's pretty cool, And even, I mean, to be talking to you on this podcast today, Sean, I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting to you and meeting you, even though we've just done it over Zoom. Yeah. And I think, if I wasn't supporting this club, this conversation would have never happened. Right. So, I mean, there was a bit of luck involved. I think there was Mauricio Pochettino mentioning Newell's, and there was a lot of things along the way that happened, like Marcelo Bielsa taking over at Leeds, that almost seems like an act of luck that benefited me and that Twitter account. But all I can say is that it's become so much of a part of my life now, that I'm just thankful and grateful that it's happened, really.
Yeah, it's lovely. And I love that story, man. As a Spurs fan, listening to the Spurs manager, and that led you researching this club, and not just researching it, but now you're invested in it. You're invested in that story. It's part of your life. And I can't say that Pochettino listens to this pod, but hopefully, I mean, someday you'll get a chance to tell him in person, man, because it's a lovely story, and I'm so glad you came on the pod to discuss it with me.
Thank you, man. Really, really appreciate that, and hopefully someday I will get to tell him. I mean, it's strange because just through following Newell's, I've got to know a lot of people involved with the club who know players and know managers. So I guess it's not unrealistic that someday maybe he could find out about me, or I could get the chance to tell him. But that'd be great, because I think not just him mentioning Newell's in an interview, but Pochettino as a person has had a big impact on a lot of people in England. And I know from supporting Spurs that he means so much to Tottenham fans. And I think while it was for me, it was such a a lucky situation that he mentioned that club and I became a fan of Newell's. I mean, there is something about Pochettino. He has made such a mark on English football and on the club of Tottenham Hotspur. And I like to think that there's a link between his character and the club of Newell's Old Boys, because what I see in him as a person is what I see in so many people connected to Newell's. Yeah. And that's the kind of warm, friendly, human side of people who care about each other and who will do anything for each other. And I think that has helped him in his managerial career. And he's become a real hero of mine. And hopefully, someday he will find out about me and my story, perhaps. But no, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Sean, and really, really good podcast you've got going there. And I wish you all the best. And I'll be listening to all the other episodes with great interest. And keep it up. And I hope and I think you will get a chance to visit Arsenal one day. As much as I dislike that club, I think it's only right that someday you'll get a chance to maybe realize your dream as a FarAway fan. Yeah. And I wish you all the best in that.
Thanks, man. And and it was something that I wanted to discuss too. These clubs, they're not just clubs. They are how they affect you, how they impact your personality. Because if you think about it, and just like you said, Pochettino, Bielsa, even Messi, there's no flash. There's no. They're so grounded, and I think it all comes from having had that experience in that little town and the lives that they've led. So even Messi, and I look at him sometimes, and even I was reading one of these articles that I think you shared with me, one of these articles that, for all his success, he's still so grounded. And then you have somebody like Bielsa. I'm hoping we can talk about Bielsa a little bit more. And there's a common thread among those guys there. And maybe you'll know more about this, and maybe some more players. There's a common thread there among those three: Bielsa, Messi, and Poch.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've been thinking about it, and I was speaking to someone else on a podcast about Leeds, about Bielsa, and I think I made the comment that my experience going to Argentina was that this was something you just was ingrained with a lot of the people. And it was related to the fact that it's not a country that has had a great economy. There's always been problems with making a living, right. Getting a job. And I think it's made people grounded. And I think it has made people feel that, well, I'm not better than this other person. I'm just like them. We have to make a living. And even when they become footballers or coaches, that right. There's always that reminder there that, well, I just came from the same street as that other person. So, there's no difference. But in saying that, when I think about Argentine footballers that have become megastars, and your example of Messi is important, because you're right in that he really shuns the limelight. He doesn't want to be a celebrity. He's a private family guy. And you can't say that for every Argentine player. So I'm beginning to maybe challenge my own theory. I mean, there is players like, I think Carlos Tevez had a bit of a reputation of being a little bit flash when he played in Manchester. There's certainly been other players like that. I mean, even Angel Di Maria, who comes from Rosario Central in Rosario, I think he's had a bit of a reputation of being a little bit flash as well. Mauro Icardi is a Newell's fan, but never played for Newell's. He has a reputation. And it kind of brings me back to the figure of Bielsa. And Bielsa throughout his career has pushed that narrative. He has turned up at clubs, and Leeds is the most recent example. And he said to his players, come on, let's go out and pick some litter outside the stadium, And he's reminded them that you're here to do a job, and don't think you're better than anyone else. You might be on a lot of money, but the fans are the ones who pay your wages. So you need to always relate to what it's like to still be a fan. And because Bielsa is such a hero for Newell's, I think perhaps that mentality has left such an imprint on the club that maybe they've ingrained those ideas in the whole structure of the club, from the academy to, the first team. Right. And I'd like to think, I don't know if this is true, I'd like to think that mentality that Bielsa has carried throughout his career has ingrained itself in Newell's, so that when players come out of Newell's and the system, they take that on, because it's a weird thing, but when I think of all of the Newell's players who have made it to Europe, there's no big kind of players that stand out who were really flash or who became known as, you know, people who like to spend a lot of money and didn't care about the clubs they played for. Pochettino has always said he's interested in projects, and he was interested in Spurs because it had a good youth academy, and he wanted to build it up and bring them to the new stadium and build a team. And he's turned down offers from the likes of PSG and Real Madrid, who don't have that same structure. Messi has stayed at the same club for his whole career. He's been so loyal to Barcelona. I don't want to be the one that claims that this is because they're from Newell's Old Boys, but there is a trend there, and it's hard to deny. You know, I mean, maybe a player will come up that completely goes against that, and you know, but I do feel that a lot of the players that Newell's develop that go to Europe stay grounded. They do stay grounded, and I hope that continues, because, as I said previously, that attracts me to football clubs and to leagues when the players involved, you know, are still the heartbeat of the club.
It's going to be great seeing Bielsa in the Premier League. I'm sure you are looking forward to it as well.
I'm looking forward to it, but I'm concerned as well. I think they are two opposites. I think the idea of the Premier League and the concept of the Premier League is so at odds with Marcelo Bielsa as a person that it might not work. But I would wonder how sustainable that relationship is between Bielsa and Leeds in the Premier League. I mean, he's been known to be a coach that doesn't care about leaving a club if they're not playing ball with him. You know, if the contract is not right, if they don't sign a player that he's been promised, he'll go, he'll leave. He doesn't care. I think the media scrutiny in the Premier League, especially because he's not a native English speaker, I think could be too much pressure for him. I mean, there's a lot of scrutiny in La Liga, but he's a Spanish speaker, so he was able to get his ideas across to the media in Spain, whereas he's still using an interpreter in England. I just think Bielsa is like the anti-Premier League guy. You know, all of his ideals are at odds with the Premier League. Everything we've mentioned so far, you know, his efforts to keep players grounded, his ideas that players should put themselves in the shoes of the fans and do normal things. So I do worry, but I think in itself, to see Bielsa bring Leeds to the Premier League, I think he'll still go down as a legend of that club, even if he doesn't manage them for a very long time in the Premier League. He's changed the club. He's done what he did at every club. He's taken quite average players and turned them into very good players. And I love that about Bielsa. He doesn't need a big budget. He doesn't need to bring in big transfers. He just makes players better. And there isn't enough of those managers left in football.
Jamie, thanks again, man, for coming on to FarAwayFan Pod and just taking me through your Newell's journey. It's been so fantastic talking to you, man.
Thank you very much, Sean. It was a pleasure to be on the podcast. And if anybody wants to follow my account on Twitter, it's at Newells_EN. It's Newell's Old Boys English. And I also have a blog / website on Newell's Old Boys, which is in English also, and that's newellscaraco.com.
I'll put the links in the notes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks again. Speak to you soon.
Thanks,
man.
Sean. All the best.
You too.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.